Hey up there! You might remember 5 or 6 months ago I published a video telling you that a new law had been passed mandating that speed limiters need to be fitted to cars from this year, and it actually takes effect in about 5 months' time. So not long now. Now, when I made that video, I knew I would probably have to revisit it at some time in the future, but you know, I sort of thought it would be a couple of years down the line, not as soon as this. There were an awful lot of comments in the comments section about how this was going to affect overtaking, which sort of made it clear to me that there was a common misunderstanding as to how people should go about overtaking other vehicles legally and safely, which I have to admit shocked me a little bit. Now, making these videos, sometimes it's like cutting a head off the Hydra. You lop that head off and you think it's safe to go on to the next one, but then two grow in its place, which is what sort of happened on that video. Now, just pay attention to this junction that I'm driving through at the moment. I'll explain why a little bit later on. Straight road. It's been a straight road like this for 30 years. 40 years ago, it was a roundabout. 30 years ago, they cut a road through the middle of that roundabout and put traffic lights in to control it because it was a bottleneck. And as you've just seen, they're altering it all again now. I'll explain its relevance to you shortly. Now, regarding these speed limiters, it's coming in on newly introduced vehicles sold from July this year. So basically, any new model of car introduced this year must have speed limiters fitted. From 2024, all motor cars, vans, etc. must have this technology fitted, irrespective of whether it's an old model or a new model. And what I mean by that is that it will relate to sales of new cars only. Older vehicles won't have to have it retrofitted. For the moment, this is UK and EU vehicles only, and for the moment it doesn't include motorcycles. But all the respective governments have made it clear that as soon as the technology is available, this will be introduced to motorcycles as well. And I expect an announcement as to when that will take place before 2024. Make no mistake, it is coming. Now, the first frequent comment that I've had about that subject is that it's not a big deal because you are able to disable it if you want to. Yes, that's true, initially. But the government has categorically stated that this will only be a temporary facility in order to encourage public uptake of, this technology on their cars. It will be removed via a software update at some stage, undoubtedly before 2024. Now, what I believe will remain a permanent feature of this technology is that if you continue to press on your accelerator or wind back your throttle, once you've reached that limited threshold, you are able to override it. This will cause 1 or 2 seconds hesitation in acceleration, but once again the government has mandated that in those situations the vehicle will annoy the hell out of you with buzzers and haptic feedback to tell you to back off the throttle as soon as possible. So it's sort of there as a get you out of trouble measure, but only as long as you need it to get you out of trouble. Now, I didn't have any strong opinions about this legislation either way. I was just reporting what the government had announced. But as a result of the comments that video generated and a little experiment of my own, I've come to the opinion that if they get this wrong, it's going to cause mayhem. And the chances are they are going to get it wrong. The government has said that these systems will be controlled by the use of cameras which will read road signs, and that they will also use GPS. Now, very quickly I received comments from people who already had this sort of technology fitted to their cars. And this speed limit sign recognition system apparently doesn't work very well. 30 mile an hour zones are mistaken by the cameras for 90 mile an hour zones. The cameras read road signs at the entrance to side roads, so they find that even though they're in a 60-mile-an-hour limit, they're restricted to 30 miles an hour limit that side road dictated going into a small village or whatever. With one guy even emailing me to tell me that his Tesla would go into limp mode whenever it came across a dirty road sign, because it was unable to read the numbers and its diagnostics told it that there was a problem with the car. I've even been told that speed limit signs on the back of HGVs or caravans often are mistaken for road signs. And it soon became clear to me that if we're relying on this camera technology, it's going to cause mayhem. So that leaves us with GPS. Now, anybody that uses satellite navigation in their car or on their motorcycle on a regular basis will know that it is often hopelessly out of date, especially where speed limit changes are concerned. And it doesn't matter whether you're using a Garmin-based system, a Google Maps-based system, or a TomTom-based system, they all have the same outdated information. As a witness-based navigation system, it works okay. You know, occasionally you have problems with them. But if you're going to rely on this to control the vehicle's speed, it's going to be a nightmare. There is a road in the town in which I live, which was changed from a 30-mile-an-hour zone to a 20-mile-an-hour zone over 10 years ago, but it still shows up on my Garmin-based systems and my TomTom-based systems as being a 30-mile-an-hour zone. And I find that to be a very regular occurrence on any journey. Here in the UK, local councils are constantly tinkering with speed limits, and the GPS system just doesn't keep up with it. Now, do you remember that junction that I mentioned a few minutes ago? Despite me regularly updating my GPS systems several times a year, the layout shown on my GPS is 30 years out of date for this junction. It still shows it as a full-blown roundabout. And just off the top of my head, I can think of 3 junctions, including this one, that I regularly travel over, where the situation is very similar. They are years out of date. Now, I would like to think that our government is aware of this situation, both with the cameras and with GPS, and that they will be working with the companies responsible for, manufacturing these systems and writing the software to improve the situation, but with the best will in the world. There are going to be delays in getting speed limits and junctions, etc. updated. The companies in question are going to be reliant on local councils updating them. But with GPS alone, there must be tens of thousands of such discrepancies in the UK alone, and some are going to slip through the net. And that's before you even take into account the variable speed limits on motorways that can change hour by hour depending on the road traffic situation. And human nature is human nature. Once these systems have been thrust upon us, people will start to rely on them. They'll become less vigilant and they'll let their vehicle do the work for them, because let's face it, here in the UK, speed limits can change every few hundred yards, and if you blink, you can miss that change in the speed limit. And I believe a lot of drivers are going to be happy to just hand that responsibility over to the vehicle, which is potentially going to lead to a lot of prosecutions where the vehicle gets it wrong and the owner finds himself being prosecuted for speeding. Because the onus of responsibility won't change, it will still be the driver that's the responsible. I have a speed limiter fitted to my car, but you have to actually activate it to use it. And it works from the same control as the cruise control. And I did a little experiment on the way home from the supermarket last week, just manually changing the speed limit each time I saw a new speed limit sign. And I tell you what, these new speed limiter systems have really got their work cut out for them. It's my personal belief that this system in itself is going to be a huge distraction for the driver. And I'm not in any way convinced it's going to improve road safety. In fact, I think there is the possibility it's going to cause more accidents, to be honest. Now, overtaking. One of the biggest complaints that I had is that these systems are going to make it hazardous overtaking other vehicles because, you know, the hesitancy or delay when you break the speed limit to overtake another vehicle is going to cause accidents. Right, where do I start with this one? Now, I'd like to make it clear that I'm talking about the UK rules for overtaking here, although I suspect that the rules will be the same in other countries. And I'm saying that because I know this channel has an international audience. It's up to you to check to see what your local laws dictate. Now, here in the UK, a speed limit represents the maximum speed you are allowed to travel on that road. It's not just there for guidance, it's a statutory limit on the maximum permitted speed for that road. It isn't, however, a minimum speed, i.e. if you're on that road, it doesn't mean you have to travel at that speed. You can travel significantly slower depending on the road conditions at the time. That is the prerogative of each individual driver. There is no legal minimum speed at which you're mandated to travel on any given road. And of course this leads to incidents where one vehicle that has been slowed down by another vehicle may wish to overtake it. And there seems to be this common misconception that while you're overtaking a vehicle, you are, if you like, allowed to exceed the speed limit. I'm afraid that's not the case. The Road Traffic Act, or whatever its current iteration is, lays out quite clearly that you as a civilian rider or driver are not permitted to exceed any given speed limit for the road that you're on. And nowhere in the Act does it tell you that when you're overtaking another vehicle you can't break the speed limit. If you're driving or riding in a 60 mile an hour zone and the vehicle in front of you is travelling at 60 miles an hour, there is absolutely no reasonable legal justification for overtaking it. It's as simple as that. Now, okay, here on the British roads we see it all the time. People travelling at silly speeds to overtake a car that they consider is simply in their way. But when they get up to a speed of 65, 70, 75, even 80 miles an hour overtaking a car that was travelling at 60 miles an hour in a 60 mile an hour zone, they are breaking the law, and if they get caught, there's no two ways about it, they will be prosecuted. Now, I think there are many reasons why people do this. One is impatience. I know of other bike riders that I don't ride with anymore who simply cannot stand to have another vehicle in front of them, and they're constantly on a quest for an open piece of road without any vehicles on it, which, you know, never happens. And those people just aren't bright enough to work out that that's the case. And then there's the other type of impatience. The car in front of them might only be travelling at 45 or 50 miles an hour in a 60 mile an hour zone, and yet you're justified in wanting to overtake it. But there's a lot of oncoming traffic. Now, yes, I admit it, sometimes you can have a very long wait for a suitably clear path ahead to safely overtake, but these people aren't prepared to wait for that. So they take a chance and they rely on their ability to break the speed limit in order to slip through a gap before they hit oncoming traffic. Now, in a situation like that, they're not just speeding, they're actually committing the offence of dangerous driving. That is a potentially unlimited fine, between 3 and 11 points on the licence. This is on top of the speeding offence. Disqualification for a minimum of 2 years, and depending on the circumstances, a possible prison sentence. And what usually happens in that situation when a prison sentence is handed out, the disqualification won't start until you're released from prison. Now, if that rider is stopped and prosecuted and he says the right things, or the Crown Prosecution Service decides there isn't quite enough evidence there to prove a dangerous driving, they may drop it to careless driving, which carries up to a £5,000 fine, between 3 and 9 points on your licence, a possible disqualification, but luckily there's no prison sentence attached to that offence. So the simple answer to all those comments in that previous video about speed limiters and the hesitation that occurs when they're trying to exceed the speed limit to overtake is that you should not be attempting to overtake if you need to exceed the speed limit. It's as simple as that. And as much as I now have my misgivings about this proposed new speed limiter legislation, that isn't necessarily one of them. Unless, of course, that technology believes that the speed limit is lower than it actually is. I envisage there's going to be a lot of test cases at court relating to these systems. Now, for those of you who want to refresh your memory about the rules regarding overtaking on the UK roads, I will leave a link to the highway code on the government website in the video description down below. Now, the main sections relating to the overtaking rules are section 162 to 169. And I will just really quickly run through the most relevant parts for you. Rule 162, before overtaking, you should make sure that the road is sufficiently clear ahead, which is what I've just been talking about, and that there is a suitable gap in front of the road user you plan to overtake, in order to facilitate you, obviously, to be able to pull in front of him without cutting him off. 163 covers the actual act of overtaking, and it says you should only overtake when it's safe and legal to do so. That means not speeding. Now, one part that I think is particularly relevant to what we've been talking about is that it says move quickly past the vehicle you are overtaking once you've started to overtake. Now, this doesn't mean speed, although I can understand that some people may interpret it that way. What it simply means is not to dawdle around, not to take your time, carry out that manoeuvre as quickly as is safely possible, but not by speeding. Many thousands of accidents every year occur through ill-conceived or impatient overtaking manoeuvres. Don't overtake unless you absolutely have to, and when you do overtake, make sure that all the circumstances are correct and that you can do it safely and legally. Once again, thank you so much for watching this and my other videos, and in doing so helping to support this channel. I really do appreciate it. I'd also appreciate it if you would leave a like and perhaps subscribe to this channel if you're not already a subscriber. I will of course be back next week, so until then, ride safely and I'll see you soon.